Egypt remembers everything: taxes, storms, wars, the names of kings, the names of scribes, except Moses. In Cairo, under glass, a granite slab waits, and people read it slowly. One word is cut there: Israel, 12th century before our era. The stone is silent about Moses. The archive loves detail, and here it answers with silence. We will open the records, we will walk the Delta, we will enter Sinai, and we will say calmly what is present and what is not. In the halls at Karnak, the king lists unfold like a measured drumbeat: names and years, rites and offerings. The walls of Thutmose III carry lines of war. The campaign lists step across Canaan with city names that can be checked. The scribes carved these names at Karnak in the mid-15th century BCE, and they carved them to be seen. When a pharaoh wanted memory, he paid in stone and paint. The record can exaggerate, the record can polish, yet the record exists, and that existence sets a rule. In the temple city of Thebes, the scribe schools kept copybooks. The House of Life stored master texts, and a practical habit guided the pen. A quarry trip is tallied, a garrison is checked, a delivery of grain is entered, the ledger breathes. At Deir el-Medina, the workmen's journals move day by day, pay lists and absences fill lines with human detail. In the year 29 of Ramesses III, a strike is recorded. The men lacked rations. The complaint runs across the papyrus. When we ask what Egypt records, the answer is clear: it records a lot, and it records with care. On the west bank at Medinet Habu, the sea battle of Ramesses III unfolds in carved relief. Ships lock, ropes tangle, the sea peoples are named. The text does not hide a crisis, it shapes it into victory, yet it shows the event with concrete detail. At Abu Simbel and the Ramesseum, the Battle of Kadesh is sung in the poem and the bulletin. The Hittite chariots wheel, the king stands alone, then relief arrives. The event is framed for glory, the shape is skewed, but the scaffolding is history. A real clash near the Orontes around 1274 BCE. Egypt remembers what matters to the throne, and it remembers on stone. In the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, the granite of the Tempest Stela carries a late 13th century voice. The text closes a long list of victories with a line that startles: Israel is named. The determinative marks a people, not a land. The phrase says laid waste, its seed is not. The boast follows the formula of annihilation. The stele is usually dated to about 1208 BCE, the reign of Merneptah, the successor of Ramesses II. Here is the earliest extra-biblical Israel. Here is a people already in the highlands. Here is a line carved by a court that wanted to count what it had crushed. The stone names Israel. The stone does not name Moses. In the triumph lists of pharaohs, cities in Canaan stand in ordered columns: Megiddo and Kadesh, Dapur and Tunip, names that can be traced. Thutmose III lists them at Karnak. Seti I marks his marches in low relief. Ramesses II repeats the catalogue of places taken and secured. When kings moved armies, the record followed. It tallied the march, it shaped the return, it set a story in place. If a mass of Semitic slaves had walked out from a royal project, if a people had broken Egypt's grip and fled, the habit of boasting would have found a way to say it. The habit leaves us silence. In the north, a royal capital rose in the eastern delta, Pi-Ramesses, the House of Ramesses. The site later shifts. The stones are reused at Tanis. The memory remains in inscriptions. The scale shows in scattered blocks and statues. The administration that fed this capital wrote orders for grain, tallied wood, counted bricks, managed teams. In the scribal exercises called Anastasi, a scribe drills another scribe with lists of supplies, roads, river heights, and brick rations. The drill shows a world of carts and ferries, checkpoints and foremen, a landscape that notices movement. Across that world, a mass flight would have left traffic, an echo, a note, a worry. In the Egyptian way of writing kingship, the cartouche holds names. The titulary ties the monarch to gods. The rhetoric announces order restored. Annals and daybooks are not the same, yet both breathe the same air. They serve office and memory. The Turin king list tries to copy the flow of dynasties, damaged yet precious. It shows how Egyptians curated time. The Abydos king list at Seti I's temple drops rulers seen as illegitimate, yet it still makes a claim: we keep time, we choose who counts. Egyptian memory is curated, not complete, but its shape is consistent, and that consistency matters. When Ahmose I fought in the Delta, his soldier Ahmose son of Abana carved a biography at El Kab. The text names ships, towns, and rewards. He fought at Avaris, he took prisoners, he sailed to Sharuhen in southern Canaan, he received gold for valor. The expulsion of the Hyksos is narrated on that wall with concrete words, a 16th century BCE event, remembered with pride. An expulsion of elites made the archive. An expulsion of a laboring horde would also have made noise if it had happened. The comparison sits in stone, in a named tomb on the east bank of the Nile. In the lists of conquered captives, the stela show bound Asiatics kneeling under the feet of kings. The icon speaks of control. In warehouse receipts, foreign names appear. The workforce is mixed. The state needs hands. The project must finish before inundation. The bureaucracy notes rations for gangs, reed quotas, and brick targets. The language is dry and precise. If a single gang deserts, the foreman writes a notice. If a storehouse opens late, the scribe notes it. The texture of this paper trail makes silence heavy. In the south, the quarries at Wadi Hammamet keep graffiti and expedition texts. The numbers of men and donkeys and jars are counted. In the Sinai turquoise mines at Serabit el-Qadim, Middle Kingdom and New Kingdom inscriptions mark visits, names, and offerings to Hathor. These stones do not tell an Exodus story. They show traffic, they show Egyptian reach, and they show routine. When roads carry caravans, they leave names and prayers. When roads carry armies, they leave year dates and stelae. 1,000,000 feet, crossing barren ground for decades, would write a different chapter. The chapter is missing. In the great city of Memphis, scribes trained under steady lights, the reed pens cut to a fine edge, the palette loaded with carbon ink. The house of Ptah kept its own archives, temple accounts were audited, lands were measured and taxed. The Wilbour Papyrus, from the reign of Ramesses V in the 20th dynasty, records fields along the Nile in metis and bounds and owners. People and acres are weighed by the pen, the state holds the measure, the details are not vague. This culture of measurement leaves us a paradox. It records so much, it does not record Moses. Some argue for different biblical dates, some set an earlier window in the 15th century BCE, others point to a 13th century horizon under Ramesses II. The archive sits across both windows. The stones and papyri do not change their voice. They name kings from Ahmose to Merneptah. They picture cities from Gaza to Byblos. They track work gangs at Thebes and Memphis. They watch the Delta. They watch Sinai. They watch the highlands from afar when kings campaign. They do not watch a leader named Moses, and they do not watch a nation escaping. In Cairo, the Merneptah stele gives us one fixed point. Israel is a people already in the hill country by about 1208 BCE. The text does not call them a state, it calls them a people. The determinative is the key. Egypt boasts of a raid. It claims a victory. It signals that a group exists west of the Jordan. The line acts as a boundary stone for the debate. Whatever the stories say, a people called Israel is there by this date. Moses is still not on the stone. In the face of a grand narrative of flight, the Egyptian habit of commemorating victory is our measuring rod. When Horemheb reformed the court after the Amarna years, decrees were carved. The restoration needed a public text. When Tutankhamun moved back to Thebes, stelae marked the shift. Order was reasserted. Temples reopened. The words made an argument. Egypt does not hide changes. It reframes them as restoration, and it writes. The Exodus would have demanded a frame. It would have needed a boast or a warning. It finds neither. In the letter world of the late Bronze Age, the Amarna tablets give a chorus from Canaan and Syria, clay voices writing to Akhenaten and Amenhotep III. These are not Egyptian compositions. They are foreign notes kept in an Egyptian file, yet they show how Egyptian authority reached north. City rulers complain about Apiru bands. They ask for archers. They flatter the throne with dust of your feet phrases. The file does not mention an Israelite nation under Moses. The period does not match a 13th century setting, yet the mechanism is the same. The state keeps mail. A system that preserves 1,000 clay requests would have preserved a crisis on its own roads. In the sanctuaries, triumph lists fulfill a ritual function. The king performs smiting. The enemies are cosmic disorder personified. The lists are not neutral. They are theater for gods and people, yet they tie themselves to place names and tributary tallies. On obelisks and pylons, toponyms stand in ovals, each place a trophy, each name a witness. If Egypt loses a workforce, a god loses an offering. A temple feels it. A text would try to explain it. The silence means there was nothing to explain. In the village of Deir el-Medina, life is small and exact. An absence can be traced in a day list. The scribe notes who brought gypsum, who stayed home with a scorpion sting, who went to attend a festival on the East Bank. When the Nile rises too high, work stops. When bread is late, men grumble. When law is broken, a court meets, minutes are taken. The village sits within a wider state. The habit of noting carries outward. A breathtaking break in labor across royal projects would have left mirrors of this habit. The mirrors are not there. In the north, the name Ramesses touches a biblical verse. Store cities called Pithom and Ramses appear in the text. The line has drawn historians to the Delta. On the ground, Pi-Ramesses flourished under the 19th dynasty. Then its main bulk shifted to Tanis in the first millennium. The stones migrated by human hands. In the records, the capital's life has official texture. Statues were moved in later centuries, yet the original letters and cartouches fix its new kingdom might. A people leaving from such a hub would cross canals and checkpoints. Those checkpoints kept scribes. The channels of ink do not show a caravan of slaves. In the ritual of royal timekeeping, years are counted from accession, campaigns noted by season, harvests marked by inundation. When Seti I marched through Canaan, the relief shows fortified towns taken in regnal year 1. The sequence is there to see at Karnak. When Merneptah fought Libyans in his year 5, the stele describes peoples and princes. It gives a reason and an outcome. This is a clock that ticks in stone and ink. It is a clock that would have rung for a loss of 10,000s if that loss had been suffered. The clock does not ring. In the storage rooms of museums, Papyri record shipping lists with a dryness that can chill. A jar count for oil, a measure for barley, a route across canals in the eastern delta, each line builds a map. The canals of Wadi Tumilat knit the delta to Sinai. The forts at Jaru and across the ways guarded the border. The phrase Ways of Horus shows up in reliefs. These border scenes in the reign of Seti, the first track forts in a chain between the delta and Gaza, a practical line of defense. A chain like that would notice a crowd. The reliefs do not proclaim such a notice. In the face of this archive, the rule stands: absence matters. Egypt did not hesitate to remember the expulsion of foreign rulers in the 16th century BCE. The Hyksos family made that memory a crown. Egypt did not hesitate to reshape near defeats into victories. The Kadesh cycle shows the method. The method leaves the event visible. Egypt did not hesitate to count other peoples in the Levant. The Tempest Stela closes with Israel as a claimed victim. The same system, looking at the same corridors, leaves Moses unmarked. In our reading, we must accept the shape of Egyptian memory, curated yet dense. The stones favor kings, the papyri favor offices, the letters favor networks, the village notes favor workdays. Across these voices, when something crosses multiple spheres, it tends to appear in more than one place. The Exodus would have crossed them all: temple supply chains, royal projects, frontier roads, highland politics. The silence is not a single missing line, it is a consistent lack across different genres. In the twilight room of a museum, the Merneptah granite looks dark and steady. The gouged signs still catch light. The last lines carry the name of Israel. The figure exists by the time of Merneptah. The people is not an invention of later ages. The stele shows Egypt speaking about a neighbor with the confidence of a court that knew its routes. The same court did not shape a verse about a lost labor force or a humiliated king. The stone's voice is calm, and it closes the door on Moses. In the reading rooms, scholars turn pages of Papyrus Anastasi. The mock letters teach logistics and brick tallies. The teacher mocks the student with real places and real math. The text is not about Hebrews, it is about managing Egypt, yet it shows how granular the state could be. That granularity supports our verdict. An event as large as Exodus would have made the homework. The absence of such homework is telling. In the shadow of the great hypostyle hall, the columns rise like a field of stone trees. The capitals drink light. The air holds dust. Here, carved on walls that survived 3 millennia, are the habits of a kingdom that loved record and display. The lists of Thutmose III, the campaigns of Seti I, the reach of Ramesses II, they speak with one voice about power and road. When the same voice does not speak a name, the silence is evidence. In the end of this first movement, the archive stands open and still. The annals tally wars, the triumph lists parade cities, the daybooks breathe with rations and strikes. The late 13th century stele in Cairo names Israel. The earlier biography at El Kab remembers Hyksos' defeat. The reliefs map the ways of Horus in the northeast. Across these stones and papyri, Moses is not present. The Exodus as a mass migration is not present. The record keeps its own chain of memory. As the lights dim on the halls of Thebes and the cabinets of Cairo, we look north, toward the marsh and the buried towns of the delta. In the north, the river breaks into marsh and channels. The ground breathes with reeds and silt, and buried towns hold quiet squares of brick. The delta does not shout. The delta preserves by layering, each season laying down a thin veil of Nile mud. Here, the story of foreigners in Egypt can be read, not as legend, but as stratigraphy measured in pits and walls. At the eastern edge, beyond the green fringe, the desert watches with flat light and long horizons. At Tel el-Daba, the modern name for ancient Avaris, excavations have cut a clean staircase through Middle Kingdom streets and New Kingdom courtyards. The work, directed by Manfred Bietak, mapped neighborhoods and palaces, yards and alleys, burials under floors, and donkey interments beside doorways. The material speaks with accents from the Levant. The jars have forms common in Canaan. The houses carry room plans seen in Western Asia. In those layers, a Western Asiatic population lived inside Egyptian order, immigrants and administrators and elites, tied to the river and the crown. In the 17th century BCE, the Hyksos rulers rose in this delta seat. Their seals and names sit in Avaris deposits. The kings wore Egyptian titles with foreign roots. In the 16th century BCE, Ahmose drove them out. His soldier carved the campaigns at El-Kab. He names Avaris and Sharuhen. He lists rewards in gold. The event is an expulsion of rulers and their retinues, an elite removal with sieges and surrenders, not a slave flight and not a fleeing workforce. The archaeology agrees with the stone. The palatial compounds burn and end. The city shifts into Egyptian hands. The timeline belongs to the early 18th dynasty. Across Avaris levels, Minoan-style fresco fragments appear. Their pigments and bull leapers speak of court art and diplomacy, not of labor barracks. In one quarter, cemeteries include donkey burials that echo northern customs, close to houses and thresholds. The practice marks identity in daily death. At the same time, Egyptian objects fill the rooms. Scarabs and amulets sit with imported jars. The mix shows a world of entanglement, not a world of sharp lines. This city is foreign and Egyptian at once. It is a hinge between the Nile and the Levant, and it holds the Hyksos story inside its mud. When the New Kingdom rises, Pi-Ramesses comes later nearby. The capital of Ramesses II spreads across canals and stables. The site is busy and bright. Its stones are later reused at Tanis. The memory is scattered. The names remain in inscriptions. The scale shows in colossi and blocks. The biblical memory of Ramses points to this sphere, a toponym embedded in a later text. The toponym is real. The story around it is not fixed by ground. The administrative footprint of this delta hub is dense. The roads and waterways would have registered unusual flow. The ledgers would have felt a break. At Tel el-Daba, the stratigraphy is clear. Middle Kingdom neighborhoods run into the Hyksos phase, then into early New Kingdom layers after expulsion. Radiocarbon supports the broader frame. The 16th century BCE stands as the window for the change from Hyksos to Egyptian rule. The occupational gaps and transitions do not match a 13th century story of mass departure from royal labor. They match an earlier political event. The files of the ground are consistent. Their handwriting is clean. The date lines cross with the El-Kab biography and the royal narratives. When we step off the levee, the land drains into the desert, tracks narrow into wadis, and the language of evidence shifts. In the Sinai, archaeology works with low visibility. Camps are light on architecture, hearths, and ash and sherds are thin. Yet across decades, survey grids and site notebooks have walked the plateaus and ravines. The routes of copper miners and soldiers and traders are known. The inscriptions at Serabit el-Qadim call to Hathor. The turquoise miners leave names and prayers. New Kingdom expeditions mark dates and officials. The desert keeps small signs when people pass often. It keeps more when people stay. Along the northeastern frontier, reliefs of Seti I show the ways of Horus. Forts strung like beads from the Delta to Gaza. each station named and supplied. The forts guarded the line, checked caravans, watched for raiders, and channeled movement into counted corridors. On the ground, remains of Egyptian presence appear at these thresholds. Potsherds and garrison debris fit the picture, even when walls are lost to sand. If a mass of people had moved through this chain in a crisis, the narrative habit of the state would have found voice. The ground would have kept signatures of pause and pressure. Farther east, the wilderness of Sinai is framed by a few key oases. Water dictates halts, fuel dictates camp size, survival writes simple rules. A population walking for years would leave latrines, middens, broken jars, and ash mounds, even in an arid environment that strips and blows. The pastoral and the nomadic can be soft on the soil, the traces can be light, yet repetition builds layers, seasonal returns write thin but steady lines. The surveys have recorded mining camps, Egyptian patrols, Bedouin sites, and late bronze traffic. They have not recorded the footprint of a nation in transit. In the southern desert, copper mines at Timna carry Egyptian shrines and smelting debris. The Hathor Temple shows New Kingdom officials visiting a metal project. The 11th and 10th centuries bring a new wave of activity. The slag heaps grow under Iron Age management. The timeline is written in radiocarbon and ceramics. These industrial landscapes show how desert labor looks in the archaeological record, anchored by inscriptions and tools, layered by seasons. No layer in Sinai or the southern margins matches a late bronze national encampment. Nothing matches 30 or 40 years of collective wandering. In the western Negev and the northern Sinai, key sites like Ain el-Kudayrat, often linked to Kadesh Barnea in later maps, produce Iron Age forts and wells. The main life of these installations belongs after 1000 BCE. The plans and ceramics fit a later frontier, not a 13th century story. The older levels do not carry dense late bronze domestic debris. They do not contain camp horizons that fit mass movement. The absence is not a missed shovel swing. It is a pattern across valleys and ridges. Across the Levantine highlands, settlements blossom around 1200 to 1000 BCE. Small farmsteads appear on ridges west of the Jordan. The pottery is simple and local. Israel Finkelstein and Neil Asher Silberman summarize this pattern as an internal growth. Hill farmers building new villages after the late bronze collapse. Pig bones drop in frequency at many of these sites. A social marker takes shape. The diet speaks a boundary in practice. The picture suggests a regional realignment after imperial retreat. It does not require a cohort arriving from Nile Marsh. Back in the Delta, Avaris gives the closest thing to an origin story for a foreign presence in Egypt, but that presence belongs to the Middle Bronze and Second Intermediate period. The city holds a Levantine elite under Egyptian skies, then a royal house that Egypt later drove out. The revolt and response are carved and buried. The Hyksos event is real and recorded. The date sits around the 16th century BCE. The nature is warfare and siege, not migration of slaves through desert corridors. The biblical arc grafts a later labor story onto an older political scar. The layers do not match. In the field notebooks from Tel el Daba, burials of infants under floors are tallied with care. Small lives are part of household rites, not evidence for a massacre. The measure of the rooms and the distribution of imports speak of status and economy. The Western Asiatic signature shows a community inside state oversight. Workshops and storerooms connect to larger compounds. Streets flow into compounds with gates and sightlines. A city thinking with both local and court logic. There is no layer with shack rows and whips engraved on pottery. There is no stratum that looks like an overnight evacuation. On the northeastern marches, Egyptian fort chains require water and fodder. Lists of supplies cut into Papyrus Anastasi show calculations for bread and beer and animal feed. A supervisor drills a trainee with the distances between wells and dunes. The text sketches a working map of the frontier kingdom. The garrisons were not blind. The routes were not unguarded. The bureaucracy lived by knowing where bodies and carts would be. The routes of the Exodus would pass through this net. The net leaves no catch and no tear. In the Sinai uplands, the best preserved camps are often small, hearths kissed with copper slag, tents known from stake holes, food known from bones. When Egyptian teams climbed to mine, they carved names and dates on rock faces. They prayed to Hathor. They left bilingual stubs of presence. If a people stayed for seasons, they dug shallow pits for refuse. They broke jars and bowls. They left obsidian of ash under wind-packed crust. The wilderness can erase, but it does not erase everything. It does not erase everyone. In the Egyptian mind, the Delta gateways were places of control. Charu and its neighbors sat at the edge of order. The desert beyond was framed as risk. Seti, the first carved scenes of patrols and reports, captains known by rank and regnal year, lists of spies caught and messengers passed along. A caravan of families and herds would not be silent in such a file. It would be noise by its very scale. It would be a problem to be solved. We do not find the problem. We do not find the solution. We find routine. On the eastern face of the Pelusiac branch, canals braided through wetlands, water levels rose and fell with Nile and sea. Crossings were managed. A moving nation needs ferries, fodder, and time. Even a miracle story bends inside logistics when written on ground. Egyptian delta towns were paired with fields and storehouses. These systems respond to shocks. The response leaves lines, shortages, reallocations, and complaints. The lines that survive show other stresses. They do not show an exodus. In the broader Bronze Age picture, collapse comes to empires around 1200 BCE. The Hittite state ends. Cities burn across the Levant. Egypt stands but staggers. Ramesses III fights raiders from sea and land. The reliefs stage victory. The aftermath shows strain in pay and grain. In Canaan, the city network thins. The highlands fill with new hamlets. Trade maps redraw in smaller circuits. In that storm, an exodus-sized movement from Egypt would be visible. It is not. When we return to Tel el-Dab'a, we find statistical detail to match the silhouette. Room sizes fit households. Animal bones fit diet. Pottery flow fits ties to the north. The gradual spread of Egyptian forms into the city after the Hyksos removal shows integration, not trauma across a workforce. Brick counts and plaster floors are steady. Water jars cluster at courtyards. The life is patterned, then it changes with the dynasty shift. The rule holds. The ground and the stone agree on the earlier expulsion. The ground stays quiet on a later flight. On Sinai's western edge, the Wadi Tumilat links delta to desert. Canal work is old here. Channels bind fields to routes. The path is measurable. Egyptian texts recognize this corridor. Border posts watch these moves. The chain of custody is practical and dull. An unplanned passage of tens of thousands would leave ruts and residue. It would bend schedules. It would stamp memory. We see planned movement and controlled flow. We do not see rupture. In the Negev, the late second millennium sees sparse sites. The Iron Age brings forts and farmsteads. The profile shifts with new polities. Finkelstein and Silberman mapped the change as a regional response to the end of imperial tax. Hill farmers take to the slope, the countryside grows. The pattern does not require an origin in the Nile marsh. It fits a local deep time, people adapting to a new ledger of power. The hills tell an internal story. The desert tells a quiet story. The Nile archive stays with its own dates. Across these landscapes, absence is not a blank page. Absence is the result of many pages saying the same thing. At Avaris, the Hyksos are real and dated. Their end is an Egyptian victory, the record names, actors, and sites. At Pi-Ramesses, the 19th dynasty builds and rules. Later generations reuse stones. The memory remains in granite and cartouche. In the Sinai, Egyptian presence is marked and measured. Miners and soldiers leave small but firm lines. The surveys carry their notebooks across the ridges. The Exodus footprint, as a material event, does not appear in these stacks. In the story that will follow, the Ipuwer Papyrus waits in a cabinet. Leiden I 344, often pulled forward as a mirror of plagues. Its language belongs to lament and instruction. Its datelines do not sit under Ramesses II. The genre does not fit a war bulletin. Before we place that text on the table, we close the door on the deserts and the delta. We leave Avaris under silt, and we leave the Sinai under wind. The ground has given what it has kept what it kept, and it has not kept the camps of a nation in flight. In the stillness before the scrolls, the delta reeds move, the quarries of Sarabit hold their old names, and the ways of Horus hold their old chain. The Hyksos story lives in 16th century BCE ruins. The fort chain lives in carved relief. The copper mines live in altars and slag. Between those anchors, the path of a mass exodus should walk. The path is empty of that traffic. We turn now to the papyri that people bring as proof. We set them under a colder light, and we listen to what they actually say. In a quiet room, drawers slide open, papyri breathe their fibrous smell, and the inked lines ask to be read without wishful leaps. The script hands us Leiden I 344, the so-called Ipuwer Papyrus, a Ramesside copy in the Rijksmuseum van Oud-Heden in Leiden, a text whose voice is older than the sheet that holds it. The copy likely belongs to the 13th century BCE. The composition is placed by many in the late Middle Kingdom or the Second Intermediate Period, a time when Egypt knew internal strain and distant fear. The poem speaks like a sage. It paints a world turned upside down, rich men poor, servants wealthy, land in disorder, hunger in the streets. The voice is not a bulletin of events. The voice is a lament shaped as instruction. In the lines of this composition, the rhetorical device is inversion. Catastrophe serves as a teacher. The king is told to hear and to restore order. The proper Egyptian word is ma'at, balance and law, heaven in step with throne and field, chaos given a margin but not the stage. Lament texts push chaos to the front for a moral point. The device reaches back to pieces like the Prophecy of Neferti, a Middle Kingdom work that thrills with trouble and ends with a named savior. In Ipuwer, the names are sparse, the dates are absent, the details are archetypal because the argument is archetypal. The genre is wisdom, literature, and admonition, not court annal and not campaign report. The Leiden papyrus has breaks and lacunae, the copyist wrote in a confident hand, then faded, then resumed, the line of thought still clear enough to follow. Translations by scholars like Alan Gardiner and Miriam Lichtheim have mapped its cadences. The refrain is steady, order is broken, the king must act. Grain stores are said to be robbed, the river is said to fail, The foreigner is said to be everywhere. The household is said to break. These are mirrors held up to vice and neglect. The poem does not name Ramesses II. The poem does not say Hapi turns to blood. The poem does not list plagues. The poem presses the king to restore a world. When modern readers pull single lines and glue them to a later story, the papyrus looks like a newspaper column. It becomes a trap. In the original voice, the images belong to a set, drought, and civil inversion and social shame. The palette is chosen for effect. The lack of dates is not an omission by chance. The lack of names is not a slip. These are the signature traits of admonition. The copy survives from the Ramesside age. The composition breathes an earlier wind. The distance is part of its power. The text is a teacher, not a witness against a specific year. On the table beside it, other papyri keep the state's dry voice intact. Papyrus Anastasi I drills a student with cargo lists and border posts in the Delta, a perfect window onto the ways of Horus. Papyrus Wilbour, dated to the reign of Ramesses V, counts fields and tenants along the river. The hand writes numbers with a calm that suggests habit. Papyrus Harris I, compiled under Ramesses IV, catalogs, temples, gifts, taxes, and the memory of a reign that survived crisis and war. These are the voices of offices and vaults. They do not switch into lament. They do not describe a national exodus across mud and dune. A separate stone in Thebes introduces a different weather, the so-called Tempest Stela of Ahmose, carved in the early 18th dynasty and found at Karnak, speaks of a violent storm. The sky turned to noise, temples were damaged, roofs fell, waters surged. The king repaired sanctuaries and restored ritual. Some have linked this storm to the eruption of Thera. The dates are debated, the cause and reach remain contested. The inscription itself does not leave Egypt. What matters is the function. The king takes chaos and orders it. The text turns repair into a proof of power. Even here, the language knows its stage, temple damage and royal response, a brief storm in a ledger of restoration, not a tidal wave of plagues that ends in a human sea. Other royal narratives echo the same posture. Hatshepsut at Speos Artemidos praises a return to order after the names of the Hyksos. The rhetoric paints earlier times as neglect on the gods. These speeches sharpen contrast for political effect. They are not diaries but proclamations with liturgical cadence. When the crown needs to tell a story of repair, it does. When the crown needs to mask a wound, it reframes the wound as proof of surgery. If the land had lost a multitude of laborers in a single blow, the crown would have made that absence into a legend of control. No such legend surfaces. A fragment in Brooklyn preserves a more domestic angle. Papyrus Brooklyn 35.144, 6 lists servants with Western Asiatic names under the 13th dynasty, ordinary lives recorded under Egyptian masters. The note does not moralize, it counts people. It anchors the presence of Asiatics inside households and estates long before Ramesses II. The texture is familiar. Foreign names in a Nile ledger, the state inside the home by way of lists. The record acknowledges foreign labor and status. The record does not acknowledge a mass withdrawal across its canals. In the Sinai notebooks, the inscriptions at Serabit el-Kadim remain steady. Middle and New Kingdom miners ask Hathor for favor. Officials sign with dates and ranks. The temple at the mine shows rebuildings and offerings. The visits give a calendar of activity beyond the valley. If the region had carried a long procession of refugees, the minor shrines would not notice by name. The roads and forts would. the papyri would. The routes are mapped by officials in texts like Anastasi. The map includes wells and measures, none includes a fleeing nation. The habit of the court to memorialize victories does not support a missing chapter of humiliation. When the Amarna years ended, Horemheb carved reform decrees and punished corruption in public words. When Seti I pushed into Canaan, the scenes at Karnak spelled out towns and toponyms. The script is precise and proud. When Merneptah fought Libyans in year 5, the Stelae named leaders and allies. The boast reads as an index of foes. A catastrophe like Exodus would have received either a tragic turn to triumph or a stern cautionary tale. We hear neither. The difference between an admonition and a bulletin can be heard with care. Lideni 344 speaks to a generic Egypt. The Tempest Stela speaks to a specific aftermath. The battle reliefs speak to set places and dates. In a legal papyrus, rations for work gangs occur with numbers and fractions. In a wisdom text, numbers signal extremity rather than accounts. The Egyptian file contains both modes. The modes do not bleed into each other without cues. The modern reader must not force a blend. In the Ipuwer text, there is no cue that says report. There is every cue that says moral address. The biblical habit of using place names like Ramses gives the Delta a real anchor. Pi-Ramesses is a powerful late bronze capital, a place of horses, chariots, and stables. The archaeological reality agrees. The stones later moved to Tanis. The memory remains in granite and inscriptions. The royal name sits in cartouches. Yet, when we put that city next to the archive, the ledgers and reliefs do not host a breakout story. The border chain does not sketch a lost crowd at Tiaru or beyond. The name is real. The event that uses the name is not fixed by Egyptian ink. The same sobriety meets the Highland story. The Merneptah Stele in Cairo names Israel by about 1208 BC. The determinative makes it a people. The phrase folds it into the logic of victor. The stone does not ask where it came from. The stone asserts where the court struck. The policy is clear. Triumph closes the line. That line weighs more than speculations about a missing book. The stone tells us what Egypt saw and chose to say. The stone does not draw Moses. The absence of plagues in Egyptian sources is not an argument from nothing. It is an argument from a culture that announced trauma as proof of its own cure. Flood failures have hymns. Famine has accounts. Disease has votive responses. Temple repairs have registries of timber and limestone. The 10 plagues as a package would sit across ritual and tax, across temple and storage house, across letter and relief, and they would demand royal speech. The network that recorded lesser shocks gives us no cluster of signals for that bundle. Within Ipuwer, images of the river turned wrong, and the dead many are pulled out by apologists, torn from their genre, and pushed into a later frame. The whole poem contradicts that move. The voice uses extremity for instruction, not measurement. The point is the fall of Ma'at and the need for a king to restore it. The papyrus copy date sits within the Ramesside age. The composition itself belongs earlier. That distance alone breaks any lock with a 13th century story. Even if the lines were closer in time, the mode would still be lament, not news. A few readers bring up other weather texts, late Middle Kingdom inscriptions that speak of chaos in nature. The frame remains the same, crisis made into stagecraft for royal repair. These records are brief and local. They do not ripple into the state at large. They do not name slaves or flights or foreign profits. The Ahmosi Tempest Stela is the largest of them. Its scale is temple repair and court piety. Its horizon is Thebes and its ritual reweaving. The content is a storm and a response, not a national loss of labor. The closer we stand to the workings of the state, the more detailed the voice becomes. In Papyrus Anastasi 4, a quarrier lists bolts and cords for stonework. The items are boring and perfect. In Deir el-Medina journals, a worker marks a day off for brewing beer, another misses a shift for a funeral. The tally shows a living routine in regnal year dates. A 40-year caravan of families would shiver this routine. The war and famine that did touch Egypt left their own marks. The Exodus does not. The silence lives across genres, not just across a single stone. Archaeology and text meet again in the far south, at Levantine and Aswan, where quarries speak in graffiti and annual notes. The flow of stone feeds temples, the paperwork follows the blocks. In the north, at Memphis and the Fayum, estate accounts record yields and deficits. The crown watches fields by name. These are the eyes of Egypt: temple, palace, workshop, and border, and they agree often enough to trust their joint portrait. In that portrait, the Hyksos expulsion is visible and dated. The Libyan War is visible and dated. The earliest Israel is visible and dated. Moses is not. When a subject is cherished, the mind yearns for a single smoking artifact. An Egyptian diary page that says it all. A stele that describes a midnight departure. The archive does not grant that wish. Instead, it offers piles of normalcy that fill the centuries. The strength of the case lies in the density of normal record. It is the daily habit of writing that allows silence to be diagnostic. If a thing shakes the organs of a state, the habit stutters, the records pivot, the king speaks. The habit of Egypt does not stutter for an exodus. Some ask why foreign memory would not exist elsewhere. Why not a Hittite or a Ugaritic echo? The question runs into the late Bronze collapse and its fires. Archives at Ugarit burned late in the 13th century. Tablets froze a last day of letters to Hatti and Cyprus. The system ended in smoke. Egypt stands as the one great archive that lived through the break, with a habit of carving resilience into walls and papyri, and with stations on the very road in question. That surviving habit is precisely why its silence matters here. At the close, we return to what is present and what is not in the Egyptian dossier. Present is the expulsion of the Hyksos in the 16th century BCE, named at El-Kab in the biography of Ahmose son of Abana, tracked by siege names like Avaris and Sharuhen, mirrored in the strata at Tel el-Daba. Present is the imperial road between Delta and Gaza, the ways of Horus carved under Seti I, a chain of forts that measured movement in jars and bread. Present is the earliest Israel on the Tempest Stela around 1208 BCE, a people in the hill country, noticed by a scribe who counted victories like coins. Present are miners in Sinai with prayers to Hathor at Serabit el-Khadim. Present are field lists in the Wilbour Papyrus under Ramesses V. Present are logistics and brick tallies in Papyrus Anastasi. Not present is Moses. Not present is a mass exodus stamped into border files and temple accounts. Not present is a decades-long encampment across Sinai that leaves ash and pots in survey after survey. Not present is a court poem that turns that crisis into royal theater. The Ipuwer Papyrus, read as lament, remains what it is, a crafted mirror held to a king, a chorus for restoration, a moral storm with no dateline. The Tempest Stela of Amos remains what it is, a local disaster made into proof of royal repair, a slice of weather with no plagues. The archive as a whole remains what it is, a disciplined memory that favors stone for triumph and papyrus for grain, a habit that steadies a wide river of years. In that habit, a people called Israel appears in the highlands by the late 13th century. A northern dynasty is driven from Avaris in the 16th century. Egyptian power bends but holds, and the deserts keep their light traces. As the camera lifts, the granite of Merneptah grows small, and the reed beds of the delta spread like green lace. The routes to Gaza hold their silent stations. The drawers in Leiden close over the brown sheet of Ipuwer. The cuts in Tel el-Daba fill with shadow. The Sinai inscriptions wait in thin air for daylight. Egypt keeps what it kept, a ledger of kings and work and roads, a chorus of victories and repairs, a bureaucracy that wrote more than we will ever read. Inside that memory, Moses does not stand. The Exodus does not march. The story beloved on other pages does not enter the Egyptian file. What if history is myth?